Good evening, everyone. This is Karen Vartan welcoming you to another Les Dames d'Escoffier webinar. It's sponsored by the Les Dames d'Escoffier DC chapter. Les Dames is a by invitation organization of women. Women are invited to be a dame because they've demonstrated leadership and passion in an area of culinary arts or wine and beverage or hospitality. And because that leadership and passion has resulted in significant community contributions. Les Dames is a nonprofit organization. We were incorporated more than 30 years ago as a 501(c) in order to pursue a mission of education and mentoring. So throughout North America, there are 27 chapters. And these chapters fundraise in order to provide grants and scholarships to women entering or advancing their culinary careers. Nearly $4 million has been raised and distributed through our countless volunteer hours. So Dame's activities take them a lot of places, and tonight we'll see how one Dame and her friends have traversed Montgomery County. There they found a notable number of women farmers who manage, own, or support a wide variety of agriculture activities. So this program this evening is under our Green Tables umbrella. It is our effort to make the link between farms and our tables and to educate about the importance of having sustainable practices for the land and water and our own consumer practices. Tonight, questions will be answered at the end of the panel's discussion, so you can send them in at any time in the Q&A box. There is no chat box. And I would say if you're interested in helping Les Dames in its mission, we will have our web address on the last slide that you'll see tonight, and the donation of any size can be made through our website. So right now, I would like to start introductions. And first, I would like to introduce Dame Claudia Kousoulas, who is a writer, an editor, an urban planner, and who, through working with the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, got interested in the culinary history of the agricultural reserve. Claudia met our next panelist, Ellen Letourneau, whose photo you will see because out in some of the rural areas, the internet is very spotty, and that's just what they have out there. So Ellen is joining us by phone, and you'll see her picture as it comes up. So Ellen was promoting the agricultural reserve through the Montgomery Countryside Alliance. She's an event planner and creates festivals and dinners and photo safaris, and it was fundraising and helping nonprofits expand their outreach. Through those activities, she and Claudia met, and they realized they really had a mutual love of the Montgomery Agricultural Reserve, the land, its people, and they bonded over that and decided to create a book, Bread and Beauty. It's a book of amazing photographs and stories and recipes. With them tonight, they're going to be joined by Cory Van Horn, who is the Director of Marketing for Visit Montgomery. Cory has a bachelor's in hospitality and tourism and a master's in food studies from Chatham University's Folk School of Sustainability. So culinary tourism has been his specialty. And you can imagine that being involved with culinary tourism, that Cory is also a very avid food writer and cook, educator, traveler, and even entrepreneur. So right now, I will ask Cory if he would start the discussions with the panel. And I think first, it would be really good, Cory, if you could share some background about the Agricultural Reserve, really what it is, what got it started, when it was created, just a little bit like that to start us off.
Sure. To start things off, just to give a little background, the Agricultural Reserve was started in 1980. And the Montgomery County Council made one of the most significant land decisions in the county's history by creating this what the locals call the Ag Reserve. It's heralded as the best example of land conservation policies in the country. And it was actually created well before sustainability was considered a focus among land development. And it contains a mix of farmland, rural open space as well. So to put it in perspective, the agricultural reserve is 145 square miles and about 93,000 acres. In comparison, Washington, D.C. is 68, just a little over 68 square miles and about 43,000, a little over 43,000 acres. So it's a big piece of land. And it's located in the northern northwest part of Montgomery County. And you can see here, there's the green part that shows where most of the agricultural reserve is located. To put it in perspective, on the bottom part of this map is where DC is. And then to the right of it, you have Prince George's County, Howard County. North of the Ag Reserve is Frederick County. And then across the river is Loudoun County. And then in the bottom left is Fairfax County. And Claudia, what do you think, and how did this all kind of then, like once the land was created, what started the results of that?
Well, it's interesting. You know, being next to the national capital, there was always going to be development in Montgomery County. And in fact, even in historic documents, you see they say, you know, you can kind of make money here farming, or you could also use your land for country estates for people in Washington. So there's always been this tension between development and open space and agriculture. And in the 1920s, you know, the county started to change with streetcar suburbs, and people started moving out into Kensington and Chevy Chase because they could take the streetcar. But really, it really started to change after World War II. And there were two national security decisions that really changed the way we use and value land. It was the dispersal of federal agencies and the highway system. So now you could drive out to your job at NIST in Montgomery County. And so farming started to seem antique and unnecessary. But you know, it really isn't. And I think you can see when you have that contiguous land that you were just showing us on the map, you really get a farm economy. Your neighbors can, your neighbors can support you. And so you get you get a symbiotic farming economy. So you get things like listed on that other slide there, hay and horses. You get farmers who are doing commodity crops like corn and soybeans. You have people doing table crops like pumpkin and strawberries. And Montgomery County is often first or second in the state of Maryland every year in the production of pumpkins and strawberries. And it really creates value for the county. There are jobs, there are taxes that are paid out there, and it really adds to the diversity of our economy and our food and, you know, and our recreation, quite frankly. And you can see, there's also the question too, is like, why in Montgomery County did this happen? Well, it was a decision with a lot of foresight, and there was planners who thought, yeah, you know, we can manage to have both. We don't have to let the entire county go to suburban development. And the question is, you know, how do you accomplish that? There are a couple of ways to do that. You could have bought all the land. Of course, there's not enough money in the world to buy all that land, and not everyone would have sold it. You could have done what's called a taking, where you say the government is going to take this land for higher and best, you know, use for public benefit. And of course, that would have been horrible court cases, and nothing would have happened. So instead, what they did was they zoned it, and they zoned it for agricultural uses. And so one day, you know, before the rezoning, a farmer could have built 5 houses on 25 acres. After the rezoning to the rural zone, you could only build one house on those 25 acres. And so the farmer had lost the value of 4 houses. And of course, over a large farm, that's a significant amount of money. How do you recoup that money? How do you solve what the planning board chairman at the time called the equity problem? Well, they came up with a mechanism that had been used only once or twice before. In Grand Central Station in New York was the most notable case of transferable development rights. And basically what that does is it says, okay, you have the value of 4 houses on that farm in the upper photo there. You can sell them to a developer in the down county in a place like Bethesda. You get the cash, your land, the taxes on your land goes down because it's now strictly farming, and you get to continue farming. So you have farming income. Meanwhile, the developer who has paid for that development right gets a little bit of extra density in a place like Bethesda or Silver Spring that we've already invested tax dollars in. And so we have parks and roads and metro stations and bus lines and sewer and water that can support the development. And so that's how you can get everybody in a market situation to get the value that they want, but you can sort of direct it where it can be most useful and most helpful.
So Claudia, so the land is created, the transfer development rights are established, there's farmlands. Are there any other benefits to the ag reserve?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The reserve was set up primarily for farming. But of course, when you have all that land, you end up preserving a lot of other things as well. There are a lot of historic, and you know them, Cory. The historic sites out there are very attractive to people. You have clean air and water. Ellen is very good on the water and reservoir situation out there. You have recreation and spiritual retreats. You have farming and local food, which is really great. And of course, you have that diverse economy that I mentioned before. Not everybody wants to sit in front of a computer screen.
Oh, that's so true. I mean, even from my standpoint in marketing and promoting tourism, the part that for the ag reserve, the part that is really interesting is even the diversity of the communities. What are your thoughts there?
Yes, that's true. That is so true. And it's so nice. When we went out there, there were so many great stories. You have people from all over the world farming. That's Tanya Spandla, and she farms there. She's originally from West Africa. David Scott in his tractor is, his family's been in Montgomery County for a long time, and he does a completely different kind of farming. Amanda Cather and Courtney Buckholtz run CSAs. They do table crops. And so there are all kinds of different products and people. I always think of it as this kind of empty canvas, all this land where people can bring their energy and ideas and really pursue something that is interesting to them and perhaps to other people as well.
So both Claudia and Ellen, so who are these people? Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, sure. Well, and we really love this picture of Courtney, just to make the point that farming is really hard work. And you can tell just by looking at her arms that it's hard physical work. But also, when we went out to talk to Amanda Cather, she described her day to us. And, we realized, oh my God, she is a veterinarian, a mechanic, a banker, a marketer, an entomologist, a climatologist. It is incredible brain work. You have to bring all your knowledge and all your energy to it. And so I always feel like when we pay a little bit more for our local food, there's a lot going into it. There's people's labor, their brain power, the land, and that economy that we all share. And you can see on the next slide that this is a tradition of women farming that actually in Montgomery County goes back quite a ways. And you're all probably familiar with the Farm Women's Market in Bethesda. It was started during the Depression, and women brought their domestic skills to the market. And it was very popular. The White House, I think I read that President Truman was very fond of the buttermints that were sold there, and Eisenhower came out, and he was quite a gourmet. So the the women who bring their energy to farming have really created a market, and they still do. And there's one more point about this, is that there's this interaction again between city and the countryside. You've got the farm, but you also need the city to create the market. And so the two of them really support each other. And I guess we should look at some of the people who are out there now doing that farming.
Oh, definitely. Tell us about Amanda Cather.
Yeah, this is Ellen. Hi, everyone. Amanda Cather is an amazing woman, as Claudia was extolling. She has multi-talents, and she originally was concerned with affecting human health and was in a medical program and pre-med. And then she decided that she would rather try and affect human health by farming healthy food and getting it to her local community. So she ended up moving down here from Massachusetts and farming on Montevideo historic property up at the top of River Road, and reviving a 400-year-old farm that is on that property and sort of becoming their caretaker. So she and her family lived there. They started a CSA, and I don't know if all of you are familiar with CSAs, but it's community supported agriculture. So folks buy a share in the farm at the beginning of the season, which quite literally gives the farmer seed money and a guaranteed investment in the crops that they're going to grow. And then that shareholder either visits the farm or gets a delivery, usually once a week for the season. Amanda's CSA was year round, and got vegetables, so produce, often meat. Some CSAs have dairy. And she just gave this beautiful whole diet to her shareholders, and it was a wonderful opportunity. She also raises sheep, and she's a shepherdess. She now currently has moved from her CSA farming to be part of a 1 Million Acre Challenge, and sort of more about that later, about how farmers affect climate change by their farming practices. So she's part of trying to turn 1 million acres in Maryland into regenerative agriculture, which helps, with carbon sequestration, and other farmers in the reserve do their work in ways that also support regenerative ag and facing the climate crisis with their practices. Also, what happens at Plow and Stars is her husband is a teacher, and he teaches STEM classes and brings some of his classes out to farm school. So there are a variety of activities that take place on the farm that are beyond providing delicious food for people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love participating in a CSA because like every week it's like my birthday. I forget that I paid for it 2 months ago, but it's like a surprise that I get to see all those wonderful vegetables and challenge myself to try new recipes. But the one that I'm really curious about, which Visit Montgomery works with, is Banner Bees. Can you tell us about the history of Banner Bees?
Oh yeah, Andrea also started sort of in a different field. I think she was on Wall Street, and she got married and moved out here, and her husband's father had always been a beekeeper, and she got interested in it and good at it, and she decided to start a business. And so what she does is set her beehives actually in the reserve, but also around the metro region. So she told me they have some down in Ward 8, and they're very careful about where they set the beehives because they want the bees to have good food, but they also try to get the community involved. So in Ward 8, the kids, of course, were freaking out at this school where she started. But as they learn, they really get some control and ownership of the process of making honey. And I think one of the interesting things about Andrea is that obviously there's honey, but she's developed a lot of other products from the bees, and she makes with the beeswax really beautiful candles, but also plant pots. And she said the plants do amazing because there's so much nutrition in that in the wax. And of course, and she sells around at different farm markets. You can also get her stuff online at her website. And so she's running this business, but she's also kind of maintaining farming out there, because of course you have to have the bees for pollinating.
Well, and in addition to the food side, one of the things that I've always been intrigued by with the Ag Reserve is the flower side too, right?
Yeah.
So there's because the bees need to use flowers to produce the honey, and one of my favorites is lavender honey. Oh my gosh, it's so good. Like an English muffin. Oh, and my favorite is this farm. So tell us about this.
Oh, the Soleado Lavender Farm is just such a gorgeous place to visit. I would recommend everyone go and see it. It's in the shadow of Sugarloaf Mountain. The rolling terrain is just beautiful, and there are just seas of lavender in season. You can come and see it. They have, you can cut it and pick it. She also, has weddings there, hosts painters, has yoga, does dinners, invites photographers out, in addition to tours of the farm. And that's a third generation farming story that's really cool. And it started with her grandmother in 1962, was introduced to the property and saw by its streams and its topography and everything that it would be perfect for cattle. So her grandmother really started the farm, and then her father took it over and was doing organic farming for grains before people were really talking about it in the wider world. And then Sophia came along and said that she thought lavender would be a lovely thing to grow and not something that you see every day in this part of the world. And so she and Kevin, her partner, started Soleado Lavender Farm, and they make, as you said, Cory, just delicious, delicious honey. They plant for pollinators there, so they have really beautiful, beautiful specimen trees, and continue to plant to bring pollinators. So there's a lot of diverse flavors in their honey, and they're really exceptional stewards and incredibly creative people. They're also fine artists. Both of them are incredible and have been trained that way. So they're multi-talented. They distill the lavender oil on the property, and it's just a really a beautiful story of third generation, just making the property anew and reviving and enhancing what happens there.
So what's interesting is for me, particularly from a tourism standpoint, with the lavender farm, is that it's a really short window. It's so it's only a month or two in the spring, and then a month or two in the fall. And that's one of the things from a tourism standpoint that we always have to be conscious of educating people is how to that food has seasons, right?
Yeah.
And the same thing with flowers. And you're not going to get strawberries in September, and if you do, they're not going to be that great. So the one thing I do have to say though with the lavender farm is it is the best natural mosquito repellent I have ever purchased in my life. Like, it is phenomenal. But what I was really surprised by was the next one, which is lamb and wool and things like that. Like,
Yeah.
I'm actually not familiar with this one. Can you tell us about them?
Sure. I just want to add what you were saying about seasonal. That is so funny. One of the farmers out there has apples and told us that as soon as springtime comes and the trees start to leaf out, they get calls. When are the apples going to be ready? And she's like, no, 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 we need the whole summer. So yeah, I mean, really, it's sort of getting people connected to where the food really comes from is part of the value of the reserve. But Lee is an amazing person and was very generous to us in supporting the book and helping us do events for the book. But she is another person who started with the sheep, but because she was interested in wool. But of course, you start to see that there are other things that come from it. The pelts, the lamb, the mutton. I think there's something about lanolin also that she does. Like there's a natural lanolin in there that's really good. And when she had us out to visit the farm, she was really insistent that everybody loves lamb, but nobody will eat mutton. And so she gave us each a couple of mutton chops, and they were amazing. And when it's not kind of like this old sheep that has been eating nasty food, it's really just like a great big lamb chop, and it's fantastic. Who doesn't want that? And it really talks about her work is so fine and very particular. It talks about the real care that you have to take and the knowledge you develop, but also dealing with meat for some people can be a little bit shaky. And we asked her about that, and she said, she occasionally has to cull her herd. And she said, she thought she would feel funny about eating one of her own animals. But in fact, she realized, I really know this animal. I know where it came from. I trust it completely, and I am totally honoring the animal and my work. And so it was a really nice way of thinking about this. And Lee is noted as a shepherd. She is recognized in this community very, very highly.
Yeah, I was going to say oh, sorry. I was just going to say
Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to, add a little bit more to her CV, that she's been the president of the Maryland Sheep Breeders and also a board member of the Sheep and Wool Festival, which is a giant happening that draws people from like 5 different states to Maryland, to Howard County every year. And yeah, she really is an expert.
Well, we're going to have to get that Sheep and Wool Festival to Montgomery County.
Yeah.
I'll be making a phone call.
That's your job.
There you go.
There you go. But I just wanted to point out, Claudia, that a phrase that you said that is really strikes to me, and something that ties back to even my own background, and that is you're honoring the work, right? You're honoring what you're doing, and there's so much pride in the people that you're featuring and in the work that they're doing. They care about what they're doing, including Tanya. Tanya is such an interesting story. Can you tell us about her?
Yeah. Ellen, do you want to talk about Tanya?
Sure. Well, Tanya's just a phenomenal person, and she's came here from Zimbabwe with her husband and kids, and she has always had a love of the land and love of farming. She does have a day job and is a systems and software expert, but she really, really, really still wanted to have her hands in the dirt where she is happiest. So she became part of a Land Link program, which is a really interesting program that Montgomery Countryside Alliance helps landowners get linked up with beginning farmers who may not own land or have access to land, and it's kind of like a dating service. So the landowner, kind of post what their interests are as far as the farmer that might come to their property, and then the farmer picks a landowner, and they meet, and if it goes well, they start growing on their property. And Tanya's been doing that for a while, and what's really fascinating about her is she grows for her community, sort of her African expat community, and she grows pumpkins for the leaves and makes beautiful dish of from her native land, and grows these really interesting melons. They're called horn melons. They have another name, Claudia. I can't think of what it is. But so she's doing something very unique, and also showing that sometimes farming is done for passion, and maybe not totally for a living, but I don't think she'd have it any other way. She's a lovely person.
So this term called, agricultural lifestyle, it was kind of a trend that was happening before, but I'm not familiar with the lady farmer. And so can you tell us about the agricultural lifestyle component to this?
Yeah, I think, we've been looking at people who are actually creating value added products like the honey and the lavender, and then of course people who are just selling the farm products, the vegetables, the produce, the meat. But Mary and Emma sort of have this more holistic view of what it's like to live in a rural area. And it's kind of like that Italian slow food movement. They kind of say, it's more about being aware of nature and seasons, and not so much about consumerism and sustainability. So their products are, have one of their scarves, but it's not around. Their products are, made to sort of last and, age beautifully. And they're actually getting into hemp for growing, for fabric. So you can go out and participate in, like programs and retreats at their farm, and really kind of live an agricultural lifestyle for a weekend.
Yeah, and I'd like to add something to that too. They also have a sustainable clothing company, so they work on raising awareness about the environmental and labor impacts of the fast fashion industry, and try and draw people's attention to the idea of the seed to closet movement. So as Claudia mentioned, like the slow food movement, it's to get to know where your clothing comes from, because actually clothing is an agricultural product when made from natural materials. So they're also working with a fiber shed that is the Chesapeake Area Fiber Shed, which is trying to revive clothing grown in America, made in America, sold in America, and that can go into the compost pile when you're done with it. So it's really, really fascinating, the things that they're pointing to and trying to educate us about.
And I'm certainly seeing that trend on the tourism side, where not only is it a direct connection to the land and mindfulness of the land, but the actual understanding of what's involved, right? Because we're definitely seeing an increase, and particularly in today's times, where there's such a need and desire to be outdoors. It's the physical activity component that I think is intriguing and interesting. And too is at least the general feedback that I get is to Claudia's point earlier, they didn't realize how hard work it is.
Yeah.
I remember talking to a traveler, and she said, yeah, I think I'm going to cancel because I'm wasting a lot of money just to do some farming.
Yeah. So, oh yeah. Oh, you should tell us about some of the tourism things out there, Cory.
Oh yeah. So, I mean, of course, because I love exploring, and I love new places to eat. In addition to the farm side of it, there are a number of unique dining opportunities out there. And what works really well with these unique dining opportunities is to be able to tie itineraries together, day or weekend experience. And, because, you spend a day at a farm, like a pick your own farm, like a butler's orchard, where, there is food there, but it's not the sit down meal like what you would expect from a restaurant. So then, then in the evening, you could go to the Comus Inn, which property in Poolesville. Maybe it's not Poolesville, it's in the general area in Upper County. And it actually recently just went through a renovation. So it had a new owner, and they completely transformed the interior of the space, and you can see completely transform the back of the space. And they designed it in a way to where it can be very community focused, and you can gather in different places. As we continue to evolve with the reopening of Montgomery County and things like that, like they'll be able to do bands. It has a gorgeous view and completely focused on Sugarloaf Mountain, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then, then you have some newer businesses like Locals in Poolesville that is just, providing some of the most gorgeous food, from the land and from the, neighboring farmers. And it's a lot of collaboration.
Yeah, I want to just mention Butlers down there too, because they hit so many things. They were one of the first U-Pick farms. They also were doing so well, they wanted to buy new land, and they found that they couldn't afford the land next door. They were actually looking in Pennsylvania, but when that rural zoning that I mentioned earlier came in, the land value went down, and they were able to expand their farm. And they laughed. Their neighbors were not happy because suddenly their land was worth less, but they had a buyer right there, and they've had a lovely long-term personal and business relationship now with their neighbor. And I think Butlers the one other thing about Butlers, which is so great, is that it has come down in the family. This is another third generation farm, and every generation has slightly altered the business to meet the market.
And one example of that is a number of years ago, they started the Bunny Festival. So, and the Harvest Festival in the fall, because, they certainly were starting to see a demand and interest in people coming to the farm, and then they turned it into an overall experience. And the other part that I think is really interesting too is they're also getting creative on the non-farming side. So you can actually rent fire pits there for hours and be able to roast marshmallows and things like that, which is perfect for people who live in DC and live in the more urban areas where you can't have fire pits.
Right.
And still have those kinds of experiences.
Right.
But I love to Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to talk about Locals, but carry on, Cory.
Oh, no, please.
I just wanted to say that Locals did something really cool. Is they bought a historic house and the restaurant's inside, and then an old outbuilding they turned into the bakery that supports the restaurant. But in the process, they also sort of melded this little historic part of downtown Poolesville. So now it's kind of integrated into the John Poole House and the old Town Hall Bank. So you're kind of nestled in this nice little historic district. So it's of a place too. The food's of a place. It's in a historic building, and it's kind of revived this small area that is of a historic significance for downtown Poolesville.
I think that's such an interesting thing, this perspective, because I hadn't thought about it until then, because, I'm very familiar with all those historic sites like the John Poole House and things like that. But the food is what's tying it all together into an experience. And it's the common thread, which I think is really, really cool. So many layers in that storytelling there. But, we also we look at it from a weekend getaway perspective as well. I mean, a high percentage of people who visit the agricultural reserve are typically day trips, where they're going out to, to Butler's Orchard or things like that, or one of the wineries or breweries. But there are people who are looking for unique stays. This, particularly in this last year, has skyrocketed in interest.
Sure.
And so some examples being is Tusculum Farm, which is located in Laytonsville, next door to where DACA Brewing Company is, a gorgeous 500-acre bed and breakfast that you can have a luxury experience in the agricultural reserve, but yet at the same time, they're very mindful of their connection to the land and their connection to what the reserve represents. But then for those who want a more rustic experience, there's Little Bennett Campground, which is a part of Montgomery Parks. And so we get a lot of inquiries and interest towards their unique spaces, such as they have a couple of yurts that you can, really just kind of really be connected to the forest. And what I love about that area is that you have no idea that you're in Montgomery County.
Yeah.
You think that you're in this faraway land. But then something that's really cool and a little near dear to my heart is the C&O Canal. So that runs along the Potomac River. And so the C&O Canal National Historical Park also runs along there and connects Poolsville and that side of the county and the agricultural reserve up into Frederick. And you can actually stay in lock houses. So these are lock houses that have been refurbished along the C&O Canal within the time period in which they were constructed. So it interprets that period. The ones that are in the agricultural reserve are what are known as rustics. So limited water and restroom facilities. So it's a great way of having an alternative camping opportunity. And, it's also a great way of having, a family of four get together and experience history firsthand, which is just so interesting.
Yeah. No Wi-Fi.
No Wi-Fi. Well,
Maybe.
the term digital detox, right, is so popular right now. And, you certainly aren't going to get Wi-Fi. Have either of you been to any of these places?
We actually did a photo shoot at Lock House 25. And because in the book, at the end of each seasonal chapter, we try to have like a special meal at a historic site. And so we used the Seneca Mill, we used Brookville, Montevideo, and Lock House 25. And it was a really fun shoot for us to do, to style it and, to be able to get in there and really experience the house.
And that's what I like about like all the historic sites that you just talked about is that, what we do and from a destination marketing standpoint and what the agricultural reserve helps us to do is to promote it as a unified destination.
Right.
So that way you get the farming experiences, you get the historic sites, because if I only promoted the lock houses, it'd be really difficult to try to get somebody from Pennsylvania or New York to come down just for that. But if I can promote it as a holistic and weekend getaway experience with everything that there is to offer, the likelihood of people coming to visit is higher.
Yeah. That's the great thing about the reserve is that you have that huge space that can accommodate a lot of different things in one place.
It's true. Particularly the outdoor adventures. I would say that farming is an outdoor adventure in and of itself, but other outdoor adventures as well. So Sugarloaf Mountain, at the base of Sugarloaf Mountain is Sugarloaf Vineyard, right? And it's so interesting because, you're sitting at this winery, which we'll talk about later with the Tastemaker Trail, but you're sitting at this winery at the base of Sugarloaf Mountain, surrounded by people who are in hiking gear, and and I'm there with my polo shirt and looking like I want to hike, but not really, And then you have again the C&O Canal towpath, and there's a lot of biking that happens in the Ag Reserve. I mean, did you all notice that when you were researching how much biking there was?
Oh yeah. And I don't know if you're going to mention it, but in Kaleva, they've really incorporated food as well. Have you ever been to one of their dirty dinners?
Oh my gosh, they asked us to stop promoting it because it's sold out. It sells out every single time.
Yeah.
so cool.
I think it's so interesting the way that they've recognized that, like you said before, food is really a thread that goes through this, because they have the dirty dinners for the grown-ups, but also the kids do farming as part of their camping experience. And so it really becomes, this holistic thing.
And I 100% agree. And they also did a really good job in pivoting. When the county had changed some of their restrictions, because of COVID and because of social distancing. So they had actually paused the dirty dinners and then started doing pizza nights. And so it was a much smaller, more intimate experience. And they did such a great job with it. It was very safe and very well put together, and they kept the integrity of what they were trying to accomplish. And then one of our number one most popular hidden gems, the sunflower fields. I mean, it is phenomenal. So it's acres, it's several acres of sunflower fields. It's actually part of a wildlife management area. And believe it or not, it is one of the most Instagrammed photos of the agricultural reserve right now, because of how popular it is. I mean, you can take a pretty good selfie there.
Yeah.
What do you all do? You have you taken any selfies at the sunflower fields?
No, I actually haven't been out there, but I am a huge fan of the canal. I just love it. I love the combination of the man-made structure of the canal and in the nature that's around it. I think it's just such a unique place.
So believe it or not, this year is actually the 50th anniversary of the C&O Canal being a national park.
Right.
Not many people know this, but it is. It's a 184.5 miles of national park. So we, Montgomery County residents and people who live in this area, get to brag about the fact that we have a national park in our backyard.
That's right.
I think that's just so cool.
Yeah. So this, I guess, Cory, is what you're talking about when you mentioned itineraries before.
Yeah. So what we've been trying to do at Visit Montgomery is kind of work on some program development and tourism development, again, to have those common threads. And what we had noticed, particularly in the craft beverage side, was that in and of itself was becoming a tourism destination. Each individual entity, such as the farm breweries that were out there and the wineries. And so as a way of communicating all of that, both what was happening in the urban parts of the county, but also in the rural parts of the county, was to tie it all together into what we're calling the Tastemakers Trail. And so what we have been trying to do through this, as it's continued to evolve, is really not only just focus on the product, but focus on the people who are developing the products and creating the products. Hence the name Tastemakers, because we want people to look up from the glass and to recognize that these are experiences that are creating memories for you and the people that you're hanging out with, but also that there is a dialogue and interaction through what you're drinking with the people that are actually making it. So a really good example is Weredaka Brewing Company. And I'd love to hear what you all think about them, because I just think they're so amazing. It's on a working horse farm. So you're sitting there drinking a beer and you're seeing the horses on the land. And then they actually got really creative recently, again, because of needing everything had to be outdoors and the weather was getting cold. They were one of the first people to set up yurts that you could reserve and to create this kind of private experience while you're on their property. What do you all think? I know that they were included in your book.
Yeah, Weredaka is another great generational story. It got its name from Washington Recreational Day Camp. And so it started in the 30s, and the kids would come out from the city and have this natural camp experience. And that was the first generation. The second generation turned it into a horse farm and eventing center. And then the second generation turned to the third generation and said, okay, what are you going to do? What's your business here? And luckily, I think one of the cousins or brothers-in-law had a brewery background, and somebody else had a business background, and they got together and did some market studies. They presented the business idea back to the second generation, and they said, okay. And like you said, it's really taken off, and has become a really great business. Even pre-COVID, it was a really great place to go. It was like a playground for grown-ups.
Oh, it really was. And then Sugarloaf Vineyard, Rocklands, and then also the newest vineyard is, of course, I'm blanking on the name because I can't see the picture.
Windridge?
Yeah, so Windridge is also another really fascinating experience because a lot of the vineyards here are very farm-based. Like, you're drinking in the tasting room is in a barn of some sort, where Windridge is a little different. They built their tasting room from the ground up, and it's very reminiscent of what you would get at Napa. And so same kind of thing as what you would have at Werdaka, where you're sitting outside, you're overlooking these incredible fields and just seeing from miles away. And again, you forget that you're in Montgomery County. And I think that is such a memorable opportunity. And what we're also noticing too is, because Loudoun County is known for their wineries, but people are now starting to gravitate towards Montgomery County to experience what we have to offer. And I just think it's going to get better and better as things go on.
Yeah, and that's a good example too of the wineries. Maryland has very unique liquor laws, and then Montgomery County within Maryland had liquor laws, and so you can set aside this land and you can say it's for farming, but then there are all these little decisions you have to make it really work. And this was one of them. There was a lot of discussion, a lot of lobbying. People got together and made it work so that you could have this Tastemakers Trail here.
Yeah. But what I think is interesting, it was a story that you shared with me, Claudia, was we have one distillery in Montgomery County, and it's actually in Rockville, but
Yeah.
there's a connection to the Ag Reserve there. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, they're funny. When we went to visit them, they said, we're a working man's distillery. Nothing fancy here, but their stuff is really, really good. But they are, even though they're not in the reserve, they do have that connection. The grain that they distill from, they try to buy it locally. They distill, and then it goes back to the farm as feed for the livestock. So you really are you're drinking local in a really meaningful way there.
Yeah, so just before the pandemic started, they actually had moved their tasting room and expanded it, and it's a great space.
Good.
Yeah, it's really, really cool, and there's so many ties to all the breweries, and then of course Twin Valley, that are all based in Rockville, back to the Ag Reserve in some way. And the part that's also really cool too is they don't view themselves as competition. They're all in it together. It's all about collaboration. An example being is February is actually known as February for Maryland. And Werdaka is actually doing tap takeovers every Friday, where a brewery that's in one of the urban areas they're allowing one of their taps to be used for them. So that way people who are at Werdaka can also try Saints Row beer or Silver Ranch beer or things like that, which I just think is so cool, is the way that people just genuinely care about what they do.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because that's something that we heard from a lot of people when we did the interviews out there. You know, Amanda mentioned she'll see this bug, and she'd never seen it in May. It usually shows up in June. She'll call someone and say, "Are you seeing this too?" Yep, they are. Can you help me? Michael Protus, who runs 1 Acre Farm, I think he got his tractor stuck. Somebody comes and pulls him out. It really is, it goes back, like I said, to that symbiotic agricultural economy that you can create when you have a really big swath of land like that.
Exactly. But the part that we as Montgomery are being very careful about is over tourism.
Yes.
When people think of over tourism, they think of these global giant landmarks all over the world, when in reality we have to be careful of that within the ag reserve. As you had mentioned earlier, I mean, yes, it's a continuous piece of land and there are roads that go to it, but some of them are pretty rural and pretty rustic roads, right? So you can't get buses down them and having large groups of people going to a farm, and particularly if that farm isn't set up to handle those groups, right? And I was thinking about that when you were talking about some of the farmers where it's a job, and they're a marketer, they're a business person, they're not on top of everything else, but then to layer on customer service and on top of that is a whole other animal. So what do you think are ways in which the ways in which we keep things balanced and sustainable, and to make sure that it's still economically beneficial for the farmers, but yet destroy it?
Yeah, it's sort of like the goose that laid the golden egg. It's interesting that you mentioned the roads, because that was, along with the zoning to the rural zone, the rustic roads program was a really important thing to maintain the character. And what that does is that, in other parts of the county, you widen the roads, you have a turning lane, you put curb and gutter, not out in the reserve. They stay 2-lane, they don't have curb and gutter on either side. And that really maintains the character of the land and the capacity, like you mentioned. You can only get so many people out there. And of course, there's no sewer and water out here, because once you run a sewer line and a water line, you can put a lot of houses along it, but that's not the case out here. It has to be on septic, and it has to perk. Again, that limits the capacity. So you kind of build in that protection a number of different ways. And but I think what you were saying about how do you make it work, there are so many different little things. Like I mentioned about the liquor laws, there's also permitting. I once heard a farmer say, when I worked at the planning agency, every time I come down here, it costs me $50,000. I hate it down here, because we were always making them do something. And, Michael Protus said the same thing at 1 Acre Farm. He needed to build this shed because he was going to put his tools in there, and maybe people would come in and get their vegetables. Once a year, he has all his CSA people out for a party. And, they wanted the county permitting agency had all these restrictions for him, and that were just not realistic for a farm building. And so you have to constantly be kind of watching what is one hand doing while the other hand isn't looking. And you have to I think always be considering what makes farming work, and then how can we share that with everyone in a way that keeps farms active.
So there has been some conversation about farming solar energy, things like that. And, do solar farms have a place in the agricultural reserve?
I haven't followed that story really closely. Personally, I feel like there are a lot of down county roofs that could get solar panels. And, you know, once you have that farmland, you really want to protect it. You really want to keep that soil and that land open. But that's my personal opinion.
Um, what I also think is interesting about the Ag Reserve and thinking about tourism too is all the farmers markets, right? You have all over the county, and that's one of the things that we do to kind of help give people the Ag Reserve experience without having to always physically be there. And that's why, like, the Tastemakers Trail is one of the initiatives that we decided to take on, was because of the interconnectedness between businesses and all the collaboration. That way, even if you're drinking a beer in Silver Spring, there's still the conversation about the Ag Reserve and where it's coming from and where the products are. So that way, there's still a dialogue, but you're not having to always physically be at the properties or on the farms, which I think.
Right. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people say to us, you know, like you did, it doesn't even feel like you're in Montgomery County anymore. Or I just figured sooner or later this will all be houses, so I'll enjoy it while I can. I think, you know, doing programs like this and your programs and Bread and Beauty, the book, you know, makes people realize this was a decision and we all have to participate in it one way or another.
Well, I have to thank founders from 1980 because they are making my job really easy.
It was an amazing decision, and you know there are only about 20 land reserves in the country, and by many measures, Montgomery County is one of the largest and most successful.
So Karen, or I'm sorry, Claudia and Ellen, would you like to see if there's anybody who has a question?
Sure.
Karen, is there
good. we do have a few.
Okay.
One now, I guess this one may be a little surprise, but here's Marcy. She just bought a farm in Dickerson, and she says they have the most beautiful views of Sugarloaf Mountain and the sunset. They're going to be growing vegetables for African and Asian communities, but they're interested in cooking some of their produce and have people taste these vegetables and things that can be made from them that are representative from other global communities. So she's very new to this kind of venture and this idea, and she's not sure what is allowed. So she's looking for a mentor and someone who can guide her and say whether she can set up, I guess, a little area for people to taste some of the global wares that are being made for the Asian and African communities. Anybody can take that?
That's really, well, that's wonderful news, Marcy. And I do think there are some regulations. I don't know them off the top of my head, but I'm happy to try and help you get connected. If you would like to email me, I can send you a few names of people who might be able to mentor you and point you in the right direction about the regulations in Montgomery County about food service and on-farm activities and things like that. But I think it's really exciting, and I'm happy to help.
Very exciting. And you see the email there, Marcy, up. And also there had been a question about where to get the book Bread and Beauty. And I told that person to wait for the slide with the information. And there you have the website.
So Karen, I'd like to also mention to Marcy, I recommend connecting with the Montgomery County Food Council, because they have their MoCo Made program, and they may be able to help Marcy get connected with other people who are doing similar things.
Oh, perfect.
Right, because when you go to farmers markets and it's peach season and somebody has sliced, peaches to taste, I've seen that, and I can't imagine that there would be a problem with getting your toothpick and taking that slice. But it seems like what Marcy was saying is a cooked product or something that's been added to rather than just the raw product. So I think the county probably has an office that can help with that kind of whatever safety regulations have to be followed. Tracy is actually looking for drone and video assets to accompany a feature development. And is anybody able to connect her or direct her to sources for making a video with a drone?
We actually have some of that in our library, so feel free to email me, and I can see what B-roll we have, particularly of the Ag Reserve, and see if that works for you.
Okay. Karen Bassinger says, for mentor help, Marcy, and whoever else is listening, contact the Women in Agriculture at the University of Maryland Extension Office. That's a great suggestion. The Women in Agriculture at the University of Maryland Extension Office. Okay, and Marcy says they have 26 acres and they are open to all kinds of ideas. We may have some other couple questions coming in. If anybody has to go, we understand that this is going to be a little bit longer than a 1 hour program, and that our panelists are willing to stay around for another 15 minutes or so. So please do keep sending your questions in. I have a question about farmers and climate change. We live near DC. It's a political area. I don't always think of farmers thinking of themselves on the front line of climate change or even being very interested in that. But this idea of regenerative farming and carbon sequestering in the soil really has the potential of re-educating, to me, I'm thinking re-educating farmers about their important part of managing climate change. So I'm kind of interested in the panelists and the people that you've spoken to, and I guess my question is, do farmers see this as a political question? Is it going to be a hard sell? Do they try and avoid it because maybe it's become politicized?
I don't know. Other people should chime in, but from what I see, I think it's a business decision. It kind of, how much do I have to pay for that fertilizer? And is there a way that I can farm with a little bit less fertilizer? How's my product if I don't use that? Gene Kingsbury at Kingsbury Orchard doesn't like to spray his fruit trees. But what he does is, like, there's this thing that it's a disruptor, and he ties it onto the tree, and it's very meticulous and very careful. For him, it'd be a lot easier to just spray, right? But he ties, he and his crew tie these things on. And so that's the decision for his fruit. I think every farmer has to look at their business and say, how am I going to make this work for me? And but climate change is definitely something they have to deal with.
Yeah, I will say that there's also a long history of them being concerned about the runoffs into the Chesapeake Bay, and thinking about the land, I think, is primary to a farmer. And the thing that they told Claudia and I over and over again is the first thing is the soil and the soil health. And one thing about regenerative ag and carbon sequestration is all about capturing carbon in the soil. And so it's just it's a natural evolution, and many have turned to no-till cover crops and rotational grazing that have been practices that were practiced a long time ago. Then we got into monocultures, but many farmers are very much engaged in no-till cover crops and rotational grazing, all things that positively affect our climate issues. So, and then I think about, clean water health, growing diversified forests. And so I think that they're, very, very much engaged in that conversation.
I would actually add to that from a tourism standpoint, which is, it just came to me, was the idea of, the no-till and, growing cover crops and things like that. From a visual standpoint, that actually helped us because there are a lot of scenic drives that happen in the ag reserve, and when it's nothing but dirt, it's not a very scenic drive. So there is that element to it where it's addressing climate change, but it's also serving another purpose, and that is to help promote them economically as well.
Yeah, and I think, one of the unpredictable things about farming is weather and weather changes and unpredictable seasons and seasonality. And that's, of huge concern. And obviously some of the effects as the climate, becomes, as it changes, and some of the changes become more dramatic. And they know they're on the front lines of being able to do something about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, my husband's friend studies pollinators and the effect of climate on when they come to a certain area to start to pollinate. And so if the weather is warm and the first item that attracts the pollinators has already bloomed and is degrading, and then they show up, it really disrupts their feeding cycle. But with, honey bee farms, pollinator farms, that's maybe a little bit more manageable because you can feed the bees and keep them. And then I wonder if they're not somewhat scarce, and are bees being moved from place to place to help farmers pollinate more efficiently?
That's one of the things that Andrea does, is she works with local farmers and sets up her bee, the hives for them. You can't move them too much though, because I think it gets disruptive for them.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting because the Marriott that's in Bethesda, actually for a while, like I don't know if they still have it or not, but for a while they actually had hives on their roof, right? And so they use that honey as a part of their catering operation. But that to me was interesting because again, it's the guests could see it from their rooms, would have conversations with guests about it, things like that, and then dialogue about the ag reserve came into play. So it's another example of being able to leverage the benefits of the ag reserve without actually being there.
Right.
Well, no further questions have come in unless somebody is typing fast, or if any of the panelists have some closing thoughts. I want to thank everybody.
I just want to say, Cory, thank you. And one thing that occurred to me as we were talking through this program is that we educate and entertain, right? So it's kind of the process of entertaining people and being hospitable and having them enjoy the place, and then they are educated about and become involved as stewards at the same time.
I completely agree, and then it goes to, well, particularly young people, right? It not only educates and entertains them, but then I hope they start to adopt those practices in their own homes. So if they come and visit, they're not going to have a 1 acre farm like Farmer Mike, but they may be inspired by that plot of soil that's next to their front door, right? And be inspired by that, I think is really, really cool. And that's almost like the ultimate tourism souvenir to me, is the memory, and then apply it to your everyday life. It's so much better than a toothpick holder.
I agree.
Somewhere I saw a question that was, I think, disappeared now. And it was about COVID and tourism. How has that affected it? You covered a little bit about the changes that some of the farmers have made to their businesses to allow people to still come and enjoy. But did the count of tourists go down this past year? What are you expecting to happen this year?
Yeah, speaking about it from a broad sense, not just from the ag reserve perspective, but just tourism in general, So to put tourism in Montgomery County in perspective, Montgomery County is the most visited county in Maryland. So of course, I can't remember the stats off the top of my head, but we generate a lot of income and economic benefit from tourism. It's a lot of business travel, and so now that everybody's working from home and there isn't a lot of meetings and conferences and things like that happening right now, the hotels are certainly challenged with that. And there's concern and always, people are very conscious of what restrictions the county has in order to slow the spread of COVID. And when there's limitations on gatherings, that becomes a challenge when it comes to tourism. What's been really interesting over this past year is my role in Visit Montgomery has always been to promote Montgomery County as a tourism destination to people outside of the county. Because since we're primarily funded by the occupancy tax, so when somebody stays overnight in a hotel, that tax is then collected, and a portion of those proceeds funds the programs that we implement to help continue to feed that cycle of promoting tourism. Well, when people aren't staying in hotels and you can't stay in hotels, you have to be looking inward. And we have really pivoted towards promoting staycations and promoting tourism experiences within your own county. And so from my standpoint and thinking about it academically, I'm thinking about how the definition of a tourist has changed. And you can be in Silver Spring and go to the ag reserve and, like what I've said before, not realize that you're in the same area, and that's kind of the benefit that we have for the sheer size that Montgomery County has. So to sum that up, tourism is a challenge right now, but at the same time, we have a lot as a county that's going for us. We're not dependent on a major airport. Because flight travel is challenged right now, we're not dependent on a major airport. About a third of the country is drivable from Rockville. So a lot of driving trips, a lot of road trips. So we're very road trip friendly in that sense. And we have some incredible tourism attractions. The Ag Reserve is one example of that. The C&O Canal National Historical Park is another example. But we have Glenstone Museum, Strathmore, and all these major facilities that when the time is right and people are able to travel again, we're 100% uniquely positioned to welcome them again. So I'm really excited about what the future will bring for us.
Cory, you're also an adjunct professor, as I recall, in this area, sustainable tourism and culinary destinations. So we have Sean asking about how Montgomery defines sustainable tourism, especially with agritourism. But I'm thinking more than Montgomery County. Perhaps you can put on your professor's hat and answer that a little more broadly.
So sustainable tourism goes beyond just recycling and making sure that you're not using too much water or the wrong detergent when you're washing sheets and things like that. It's such a much broader and holistic approach. Sustainability also incorporates culture, diversity. Culinary is a big part of that. And for me, I always boil it down to, which is why I love teaching about food journeys and culinary tourism, is that at the end of the day, food is the common thread. It is the means in which we have a dialogue and we have a conversation. And even if the conversation isn't, it isn't in the way that you want it to, through food, you can have a dialogue. And so I would say sustainability is all that across the board. And what makes Montgomery County unique is the fact that we have all those elements and we thrive on that. The diversity here is incredible. Our accessibility, a major city like Washington, D.C., the fact that we're so driven and are really able to have a sense of pride is then what's translated from the tourism experience. And all of that ties into sustainability. And then at the end of the day, you know, the businesses have to survive. They have to be successful and they have to make money. And so there's that delicate balance of making sure that policy and business needs align so that way people can make money, but yet still keep it for future generations.
And if this has perhaps generated an idea out there, either by a young person or their parents, where can someone pick up some courses on culinary tourism or destination tourism, the kinds of things that you teach?
So I teach, I actually teach at Chatham University, so it's an online course. So it's out of Pittsburgh. The University of Maryland Eastern Shore has a hospitality program that's actually based in their Shady Grove campus here in Montgomery County. Montgomery College has a hospitality and tourism program as well, which is really, really well done, very hands-on. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's if you have an entrepreneurial spirit and you want to develop a tour in Montgomery County, give me a call because I want you so I can promote them. And I'll figure out a way to help you because the more tours, the better.
Cory, do we have one last slide?
We do. Let me pull it up for you. There you go.
Okay. It's our thank you to the audience and the panelists. I do want to thank everybody and remind everyone, if you aren't aware, that these programs are recorded. So if you want to refer a friend to the website, they can listen to the program. And if you go to that website, you can add your name to our public registration list, and you'll get an email when we are providing public programs. There are some programs that are just for DOMs, for their education, and then many that we have to help the public. And again, on that website, if you like to make a donation of any size to help us defray the cost of what we're doing, these free programs during COVID, or to make a little larger donation that will go into grants and scholarships for the women that are outstanding students. And the women that come and apply for our scholarships and our grants, the organizations, they come in all ages and shapes and sizes, and the thing that's the continuous thread is their passion and their dedication and their just need to excel in their chosen field, their desire to excel. So we're very excited to try and help those women. I think I'll say our last thank you and goodbye. And wonderful. We'll see you on our next program. To the audience and to our panelists, I hope you'll participate in the audience in the future.
And Karen, I wanted to thank you for inviting us. This was fun.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yeah, I'm hoping to have a next program on pollinators, on bees. So stay tuned.
Okay.